Hello, and welcome. If you find yourself here tonight, perhaps you're searching for a little escape from your own worries and thoughts. Maybe you simply enjoy hearing gentle ancient stories. Or maybe you're just hoping that if I speak long enough, you'll drift peacefully off to sleep. Either way, I'm truly glad you're here. You deserve this moment of calm. If you enjoy this little journey, feel free to follow this channel, so you'll always have a place to return when you need rest. There will always be more stories, some fascinating, some a little sad, and some that might be, well, just boring enough to help you close your eyes. Tonight, I'd love to share with you one of the most beloved tales from the Shahnameh, the great Persian book of kings. This is the story of Rostam and Sohrab. It is a story of strength and destiny, of pride and longing, of a father and a son who did not know one another until it was far too late. Some say that all tragedies begin with hope. Perhaps that is why this tale still moves hearts, even after 1,000 years. So, find a comfortable position, rest your eyes, breathe slowly and evenly, and let us begin. The birth of a hidden son. In a time when the world was still young and the mountains of Persia reached toward the sky like the outstretched hands of forgotten gods, there lived Rostam, the mightiest warrior of his age. Rostam was the son of Zal, who had been raised by the Simurgh, the great and gentle bird, whose feathers glimmered with every color of the dawn. From childhood, Rostam was marked for greatness. His strength was like that of 10 men, and his courage was unshakable. Kings sought his counsel. Armies trembled at the sound of his name. Yet for all his power, there were moments when Rostam was simply a man. He knew longing, loneliness, and the quiet dreams that stir in every human heart. One evening, as the sun sank behind the farthest mountains, Rostam found himself in the kingdom of Samangan. There, he was welcomed by the local king and offered a place to rest. His horse, the faithful Raksh, was taken to the royal stables. In the cool hush of night, as he lay upon soft cushions, Rostam dreamed. He dreamed of a woman whose beauty shone brighter than the moon. He dreamed of eyes like polished amber and hair black as the space between stars. And when he awoke, that vision remained with him. What he did not know was that the king's daughter, Princess Tamine, had also dreamed. She had heard of Rostam's deeds, how he had slain dragons and demons, how he had defended Persia with honor. She had imagined again and again the shape of his face and the sound of his voice. Some say destiny moves quietly like a breeze through tall grass, and some say it is loud as thunder. In that moment, for Rostam and Tamine, destiny was both. When the palace had grown still, and the guards had ceased their rounds, Tamina slipped from her chambers. She carried a lamp whose small flame wavered in the darkness. Step by step she crossed the halls until she reached the door of Rostam's chamber. Her heart beat so fast she wondered if it might wake the entire household. But she knocked softly, just once, and inside Rostam stirred. He opened the door and beheld the princess, her face luminous in the flickering light. In that instant, all the tales he had heard of Samangan's beauty seemed pale beside her presence. Tamine lowered her gaze and spoke in a voice that trembled only slightly. "Forgive my boldness," she said. "I have come because I could not bear to stay away. I have heard of your strength and your virtue, and I have dreamed of you every night." Rostam was silent for a moment. Some say he was astonished. Others say that he too felt the pull of something vast and inevitable. At last he nodded and invited her to sit beside him. That night, in the quiet hours before dawn, the two spoke of many things, of fate and longing, of duty and desire. And before the first birds began their songs, Tamine became his bride. From their union a child was conceived, but by morning Rostam knew he must continue his journey. War was rising in the west, and his king had summoned him. With a heavy heart, he gave Tamina a single token, an armband set with precious stones. "If the child is a daughter," he said, "keep this for her dowry. But if it is a son, bind this upon his arm, so that I may know him when the day comes." And so Rostam departed, not knowing that he had planted the seed of both his greatest joy and his deepest sorrow. As the seasons turned, Princess Tamina carried her child beneath her heart. She felt him grow stronger day by day, and sometimes she believed she could sense the destiny that would follow him, like a shadow stretching across the future. When the time came, she brought forth a son. He was born with hair dark as midnight, and eyes so clear they seemed almost to see beyond the walls of the chamber. Tamina named him Sohrab, steady breath. As the boy grew, it became clear that he had inherited more than his father's strength. Before he was even a man, Sohrab could lift a grown soldier as easily as a child lifts a toy. His hands were skilled with sword and spear. His heart was brave, but never cruel. Yet, for all his power, there was a gentleness in him, something that reminded his mother of that night when a quiet flame had burned between them. Each year she watched him become more like Rostam, and each year she wondered if the day would come when father and son would stand side by side, or perhaps face each other in some cruel twist of fate. When Sohrab reached manhood, Tamina called him to her side. In her hands, she held the armband Rostam had given her so long ago. "My son," she said, "this belonged to your father." Sohrab's eyes widened as he took the band, turning it over in his palms. She told him the truth, that he was born of Rostam, the mightiest warrior in Persia, that he carried in his blood the strength of heroes. And as she spoke, something stirred in Sohrab, a yearning he had never fully understood. The yearning to find the man who had given him life and to prove himself worthy of that legacy. The dream of conquest. As the first warmth of spring melted the snows upon the mountain passes, Sohrab began to plan. the season's breath echoing Nowruz's promise of renewal. He believed that if he could find Rostam and stand beside him, they could unite the kingdoms of Persia and Turan. No force could withstand them, no enemy could defy them. Some say this was ambition, others say it was the purest expression of longing, a son's desire to be known by his father. One evening, Sohrab stood upon the ramparts, looking out over the plains. The sky was deepening from gold to purple, and a hush had fallen over the land. In that quiet, he spoke to the wind.
"Father," he whispered, though he did not know whether Rostam could hear him, or whether he spoke only to the night. "I will find you, and together we will shape the world." But even the best intentions can set in motion forces no man can control. Sohrab sent messengers to gather warriors. He prepared his armor, polished his sword, and as dawn broke, he set out with his army, unaware that each step carried him closer to a destiny neither he nor Rostam could escape.
The march to Persia. The journey took many weeks. Sohrab's army moved like a dark river across the plains, gathering strength as it went. Villages surrendered without resistance, for the sight of the young warrior, tall and unbowed in his saddle, was enough to dissolve any thoughts of defiance. Each night, Sohrab would sit beside his campfire, the armband hidden beneath his tunic. Sometimes he would take it out, tracing the patterns with his thumb. He wondered whether Rostam still remembered the woman in Samangan, or whether he had long since buried that memory beneath other triumphs and other sorrows. But Sohrab refused. "First," he said, "I must find my father. Then the world can decide what to call me." In these words there was no arrogance, only the quiet conviction of a man certain of his purpose. And in the darkness beyond the firelight, fate waited, silent and patient. The Council of Persian Lords. Word of the advancing army reached the Persian capital long before Sohrab himself appeared. The king, Qaboos, summoned his counselors. The great hall filled with anxious voices, men who had seen too many wars to underestimate any threat. Some urged negotiation, others demanded immediate battle, but all agreed on one thing. If Persia was to withstand this young conqueror, they must call upon Rostam. Messengers were dispatched at once, riding day and night until they reached Rostam's home. He was found seated beneath an ancient tree, sharpening his blade. When he heard the king's summons, Rostam rose without hesitation. Some say he felt a chill upon his heart, though he did not yet know why. He called for his armor and for Rakash, his faithful horse, and as he set out, he felt the first stirrings of unease, a sensation like the shadow of a dream he could not quite recall. The camp by the river. By the time Rostam reached the Persian camp, the first skirmishes had already begun. Smoke curled into the pale morning sky. He listened as scouts described the enemy, a young warrior of extraordinary strength and courage, whose troops seemed to follow him not merely out of fear, but love. Some claimed the youth was no ordinary man. Others whispered that perhaps he was the son of a demon, born to destroy Persia. But Rostam said nothing. Instead, he sat apart that night, beside a small river whose waters murmured over smooth stones. He removed his helmet, and placed it upon the grass. For a long while he simply watched the current, as though it might carry his thoughts away. In his heart he felt a strange unease, a sense that this battle was unlike any he had fought before. But dawn came all the same, indifferent to the worries of men. And with dawn, the time for reflection ended. As the sun rose, Sohrab's army formed ranks along the plain. The young warrior rode before them, his armor gleaming like hammered gold. When he spoke, his voice carried across the field, calm and resolute. "Bring me your greatest champion," he called. "Let us meet in single combat, that this bloodshed might end swiftly." In the Persian camp, all eyes turned to Rostam. He had donned his helmet again, so that none might see his face. Without a word, he mounted Rakesh and rode forward. The two armies fell silent as the champions approached one another. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other. Two men, bound by ties neither could yet name. At last, Sohrab spoke. "There is honor in you," he said quietly. "I have heard of Persia's great warrior, Rostam. They say he alone is worthy of respect among your ranks. I had hoped he would come himself." Rostam's heart stirred, but he kept his voice level. "Rostam is far from here," he lied. "Today you face me instead." Sohrab studied him, as though searching for some hidden truth behind the iron visor. Then he nodded, slowly. "So be it." And they prepared to fight. The two warriors circled, each measuring the other with the patience of men who understood that a single mistake could end all things. Their horses stamped the earth, nostrils flaring, as though they too felt the weight of this meeting. At last, Sohrab struck. His spear flashed toward Rostam's chest, but with a motion as fluid as thought, Rostam parried. Blades rang like distant bells. Once, twice, they clashed, and the watching armies held their breath. Then Sohrab lunged, seizing Rostam by the belt. With strength that seemed impossible, he heaved the older warrior from his saddle and cast him to the ground. A cry rose from the Persian ranks, but Sohrab did not strike. He stood above Rostam, breathing heavily. "Tell me your name," he demanded. "Tell me whether you are the one I seek." Rostam's mind raced. He felt a longing he could not name, a desire to speak the truth, to lift the veil of iron between them. But pride is a cunning master. "I am but a soldier," Rostam said at last. "Strike, if you wish." Sohrab hesitated. Then, slowly, he stepped back and allowed Rostam to rise. "Another day," he said quietly, and with that, the first battle ended. The lonely night. That night, Sohrab returned to his tent. He dismissed his captains and sat alone, the armband hidden against his skin. Some part of him had hoped, against all reason, that this faceless warrior was his father. But he told himself it could not be. Surely Rostam would have known him.
Surely he would have claimed him. And yet, in the hush between midnight and dawn, doubt crept in like a cold wind. In the Persian camp, Rostam too lay awake. He stared into the darkness, remembering the feel of the young man's hands as they had lifted him from the earth, remembering the gentleness in that moment when Sohrab might have killed, but did not. And in that silence, Rostam wondered if he had made the gravest mistake of his life.
The second challenge. With dawn came the drums of war once more. Neither side wished to surrender, and so Sohrab and Rostam rode again to meet in the space between the armies. This time, there were no words, only the soft rush of wind across the plain, and the knowledge that this meeting could not end as the last had ended. They circled one another, slow as the turning of the earth. Sohrab's eyes searched the iron mask that hid Rostam's face. He felt a sorrow he could not name, a sorrow so deep it threatened to dull the edge of his blade. But duty is heavier than longing. And so he struck. Their weapons clashed, sparks leaping into the morning light. Once more, Sohrab seized Rostam by the belt and wrenched him to the ground. Once more he stood over the older warrior, his breath ragged, his heart aching. "Tell me your name," he whispered. "Tell me, before this must end." But Rostam's pride would not let him speak. Some say he feared the shame of admitting defeat before all Persia. Others believe he simply could not bear the thought that this mighty young man might truly be his son. And so he remained silent. In that moment, Sohrab made a choice he would never escape. He let Rostam stand again, and together they prepared for the final struggle. The final battle. When the sun reached its zenith, casting no shadow at all, they met a third time. This time, there would be no mercy, no questions, no hesitation. Sohrab lunged, and Rostam met his charge with all the strength he possessed. They grappled, their armor groaning beneath the strain. Sand rose around them in choking clouds. And then, with a cry that tore the sky itself, Rostam lifted Sohrab and dashed him to the earth. The young man's armor split beneath the blow. For an instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. Sohrab lay still. Rostam staggered back, his heart hammering in his chest. And then, as the dust began to settle, Sohrab turned his gaze upward. His eyes, dark as midnight, were filled not with fear, but with a sorrow so profound it made even the watching soldiers weep. Slowly he lifted a trembling hand and drew aside the edge of his tunic. There, glinting in the harsh daylight, was the jeweled armband, the token Rostam had given to Tamine, the sign by which he had promised to know his child. Rostam fell to his knees. Some say he tore his helmet from his head and let it fall upon the earth. Some say he cried out so loudly that the mountains themselves seemed to echo his grief. "Tell me this is not so," he whispered. But Sohrab only smiled, a faint, tired curve of his lips. "Father," he said, and then he closed his eyes. No poem, no tale, no song has ever fully captured the sound of Rostam's sorrow. They say he pressed his hands to the wound, trying to hold back the tide of life. They say he called upon every god he knew, begging them to spare Sohrab. But no power in heaven or earth could undo what had been done. Around them, the armies watched in silence, enemies forgotten, victory forgotten. There was only the grief of a father who had slain his own son. In the hours that followed, Rostam sent for healers. He gave orders for the best physicians to be brought, no matter the cost, no matter the distance. But Sohrab's breathing grew shallow, his pulse slowed. And at last, when the stars began to emerge, he spoke once more. "Do not grieve too long," he said softly. "For though my life has ended, I have found you." And with that, Sohrab was gone. As dawn rose over the battlefield, its light washed the land in a pale, merciless clarity. Rostam remained where he had fallen, Sohrab's head resting upon his knee. His armor was stained with dust and blood, and in his eyes there was nothing but emptiness. At last the physicians approached. Their voices were soft, almost afraid. "There is nothing more to be done," they whispered. Rostam nodded. His hand rested upon the jeweled armband, the symbol of everything he had lost. Slowly, he lifted Sohrab's body in his arms. The soldiers of Persia and Turan watched in silent accord as he carried his son away from the field where pride had wrought its cruelest consequence. Some say that the earth itself mourned, that the rivers ran slower and the wind carried a lament through the passes of the mountains. In every corner of the land, mothers held their children closer. Fathers looked upon their sons with new eyes. And the story spread of a warrior who had conquered every enemy but could not conquer his own fate. The return to Samangan. Rostam made the long journey to Samangan, where Tam and Ney waited. She came forth from the palace as he approached, her face pale, her eyes searching. And when she saw what he carried, she sank to her knees. No words were spoken. For some, grief is too vast for language. Together they laid Sohrab to rest. There was no monument grand enough to honor his memory, no treasure that could ease the ache in their hearts. But in time, the world moved on, as it always does. Wars were fought and forgotten. Kings rose and fell. Yet the story of Rostam and Sohrab endured, a reminder that even the greatest among us are bound by the same fragile threads of love and loss. The echo of legend. And so ends this tale, a story of longing and destiny, of strength and sorrow. Perhaps you have felt, in listening, the quiet pull of recognition. For in every life, there are moments when we wish we could call back a single choice, a single word unspoken, when we long to see the face of someone we have lost. This is why the Shahnameh remains after so many centuries, not because of the battles or the conquests, but because it tells us, in a voice as old as time, that all hearts are the same beneath their armor. Thank you for sharing this story with me tonight. There will always be another tale to tell. Some will be wondrous, some will be sorrowful, and some perhaps a little boring. But if they help you rest, then they have served their purpose. May your dreams tonight be peaceful, and may you wake with a heart a little lighter. Good night.